It was supposed to be a routine day at the county courthouse. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows, casting long rectangles of light across the polished floor as people filed into the building. Security checks moved at their usual pace, IDs scanned, bags checked, metal detectors beeping occasionally when someone forgot to remove their keys or belt. Among those entering the courthouse that Tuesday morning was Kira Wilson. At 42, she carried herself with quiet confidence earned through 15 years in security operations. Today, she wore dark blue jeans, a simple cream blouse, and a navy blazer, comfortable clothes rather than her usual uniform. Her natural hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore minimal jewelry, just small silver studs in her ears and her mother's thin chain necklace tucked beneath her collar. No one gave her a second glance as she passed through security. She wasn't in uniform because today wasn't about being seen. It was about seeing. As the newly appointed Deputy Director of Security for the entire judicial district, Kira had been tasked with reviewing security protocols across all 12 courthouses under her jurisdiction. This particular courthouse, located in the eastern part of the county, had reported several security incidents in recent months. Just observing today, she told herself, tucking her official ID into her pocket, rather than wearing it on display. She wanted to see how things really worked when staff thought no one was watching. Courtroom 3B was hosting preliminary hearings for several cases, including one involving alleged fraud at a local bank. Nothing particularly high profile, but enough to draw a decent crowd. Kira slipped into a seat in the back row, positioning herself where she could observe both the proceedings and the security officers stationed around the room. She pulled out a small notebook and began jotting down observations. 2 officers at the main entrance, one by the judge's bench. Response time when a spectator's phone rang, 47 seconds. Officer near the jury box seemed distracted, checking his watch repeatedly. The security camera in the corner had a blind spot covering nearly a quarter of the room. As the morning progressed, Kira filled page after page with notes. This was why she preferred first-hand observation to reading reports. The official security assessments claimed this courthouse maintained excellent vigilance and response protocols, but what she was seeing told a different story. "Excuse me, ma'am." The voice came from her left. Kira looked up to find a security officer standing over her. He was young, perhaps in his late 20s, with short-cropped hair and a clean-shaven face that made him look even younger. His name badge read, Officer Taylor. His posture was stiff, one hand resting near his belt. "Yes?" Kira kept her voice low, mindful of the proceedings continuing at the front of the courtroom. "What are you writing?" Officer Taylor's tone carried an edge of suspicion. "Just taking notes," Kira replied calmly, closing her notebook slightly. The officer's eyes narrowed. "Notes on what, exactly?" "Recording of the proceedings requires prior authorization from the judge." Kira opened her mouth to explain but was cut off by a second officer who had approached from the other side. This one was older, with gray streaking his temples and deep lines around his mouth that suggested he frowned more often than he smiled. His badge identified him as Officer Reynolds. "Is there a problem here?" Reynolds asked, though his question seemed directed at Taylor rather than Kira. "This woman's been writing detailed notes all morning," Taylor said. "Seems suspicious." Reynolds turned his attention to Kira. "Ma'am, may I ask what your business is in court today?" Kira kept her expression neutral, though inside she was noting how quickly the situation had escalated. 2 officers for someone, simply taking notes, an overreaction that confirmed some of her concerns about resource allocation. "I'm observing the security protocols," she explained quietly. "I'm here in a professional capacity." "Professional," Reynolds repeated. "Are you an attorney?" "No, I work in security." Kira reached toward her bag, intending to retrieve her credentials. "Ma'am, keep your hands where we can see them." Taylor's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby spectators. Kira froze, then slowly raised her hands slightly. "I was just reaching for my ID." "You can show your ID outside," Reynolds said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "You're disrupting court proceedings. Please come with us." Kira glanced around the courtroom. The judge was still focused on the case at hand. but several spectators were now watching the interaction with curious expressions. Creating a scene would only make things worse, both for her and for the officers who clearly didn't recognize who she was. "All right," she agreed quietly, "but this is unnecessary." As she stood, Taylor moved behind her while Reynolds led the way toward the exit. Kira felt a flush of warmth climb her neck as people stared. This wasn't her first experience with being singled out, but that didn't make it any less uncomfortable. The heavy wooden doors swung shut behind them as they entered the marble-floored hallway outside the courtroom. The space was mostly empty except for a couple of attorneys huddled in conversation near a bench and a custodian polishing the handrail of the nearby staircase. "Now," Reynolds said, his voice firmer in the privacy of the hallway, "I need to see some identification. What's your real purpose here?" The emphasis on real didn't escape Kira's notice. "As I was saying inside, I'm here to observe security protocols. If you'll allow me to reach into my bag, I'll show you my credentials." Reynolds nodded curtly and Kira slowly opened her bag. She removed her wallet and flipped it open to reveal her government-issued ID card. The photo, taken just 3 months ago when she accepted the promotion, showed her in formal dress uniform. Below her picture, in bold letters, "Kira Wilson, Deputy Director of Security, 7th Judicial District." Taylor, who had moved to peer over her shoulder, let out a small audible gasp. Reynolds's face went through a remarkable transformation, confusion, then disbelief, and finally something close to horror as understanding dawned. He straightened, immediately his entire demeanor shifting. "Deputy Director Wilson," he said, his voice suddenly formal. We didn't realize." "Clearly," Kira replied. She kept her tone even, though her heart was still beating a bit faster than normal. She slipped her ID back into her wallet. "I was conducting an unannounced security assessment." "Ma'am, I deeply apologize for the misunderstanding," Reynolds said. Beside him, Officer Taylor looked as though he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him. "This wasn't a misunderstanding, Officer Reynolds," Kira said. "This was a demonstration of exactly why I'm here. In the past 3 months, this courthouse has had 4 security incidents, including one where an unauthorized person gained access to judges' chambers." She looked between the 2 officers. "Neither of you recognized the deputy director of your own department. Neither of you thought to discreetly check credentials before creating a scene in a courtroom, and both of you immediately escalated a situation with someone who was simply taking notes." The custodian had stopped polishing the railing and was now watching with undisguised interest. The 2 attorneys had also paused their conversation, glancing over occasionally. "We were just following protocols for suspicious behavior," Taylor offered weakly. "And who determines what qualifies as suspicious?" Kira asked. She didn't wait for an answer. "I'd been sitting in that courtroom for nearly 3 hours. I went through the same security screening as everyone else. The only thing that made me suspicious was that I was taking notes." Reynolds cleared his throat uncomfortably. "We've had issues with unauthorized recordings, and I'm aware of the incidents." Kira cut him off. "I've read every security report filed in this district for the past year. But Officer Reynolds, do you think someone intending to cause problems would sit in plain view taking notes for 3 hours?" The older officer had no response to that. Kira checked her watch. It was nearly lunchtime, and the morning's events had given her plenty to think about. "I'll be continuing my assessment this afternoon. I trust there won't be any further issues?" "No, ma'am," both officers replied almost in unison. "Good. And I expect this won't make its way through the courthouse gossip mill before I've completed my evaluation?" It wasn't really a question. "Of course not," Reynolds assured her, though the nervous glance he shot toward the onlookers suggested he knew that ship had already sailed. Kira nodded and turned toward the building's cafeteria. As she walked away, she could hear the hushed, urgent whispers behind her. By the end of lunch, everyone in the building would likely know what had happened. That wasn't ideal for her undercover observations, but maybe it would serve as a wake-up call. She found an empty table in the corner of the cafeteria and opened her notebook again. At the top of a fresh page, she wrote, "Eastern Courthouse, Day 1 findings." Below that, she added, "Security staff failed to recognize senior leadership. Profiling concerns. Escalation without proper cause. There was much more work to be done. This was just the beginning. Kira spent her lunch break in the courthouse cafeteria, picking at a wilted salad while reviewing her morning notes. The food was exactly what she expected from a government building, bland, overpriced, and served with a side of indifference by staff who'd been there too long. Still, it gave her time to think. The morning's incident kept replaying in her mind. The officers' reactions when they saw her ID, the way their faces had changed. 20 years in security work had taught her to read people, and what she'd seen was more than just embarrassment. There was genuine surprise there, as if they couldn't believe someone like her could hold such a position. "Mind if I join you?" Kira looked up to see a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and sharp eyes standing beside her table. She wore a black robe draped over her arm. One of the judges. "Please." Kira gestured to the empty chair across from her. The woman sat down and extended her hand. "Judge Patricia Chen, and you must be the deputy director who's causing quite a stir this morning." Kira shook the offered hand. "News travels fast. In courthouses, faster than light." Judge Chen unwrapped her sandwich. "One of my clerks overheard the whole thing. Said you handled it with remarkable restraint." "I was just doing my job," Kira replied, closing her notebook. "That's not how I heard it," Chen said between bites. "I heard Officers Reynolds and Taylor made complete fools of themselves. They're scrambling now, trying to explain to their supervisor why they escorted the deputy director out of a courtroom." Kira sighed. So much for conducting the rest of her assessment under the radar. "That wasn't my intention." "No?" Chen raised an eyebrow. "Then why come incognito?" "Because people behave differently when they think no one's watching," Kira said. "Reports tell one story. Reality often tells another." Chen studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Smart, though I'm guessing your cover's blown now." "Thoroughly," Kira agreed. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Chen spoke again. "You know, we've been asking for a security review for months. After that incident with the man who made it all the way to my chambers, I read the report," Kira interrupted gently. "It was concerning." "Concerning?" Chen put down her sandwich. "He had a knife, Deputy Director Wilson. He got past 3 checkpoints with a knife and a grudge because one of our officers was too busy flirting with a legal assistant to check his bag properly." Kira nodded. That incident had been one of the reasons she'd prioritized this courthouse for review. "That's exactly why I'm here." "Good." Chen gathered her trash onto her tray. "Because the next time, we might not be so lucky." After lunch, Kira decided to abandon any pretense of anonymity. She clipped her official ID to her blazer and headed back toward courtroom 3B. As she walked, she noticed the subtle shifts in how people regarded her. The double takes, the whispers behind hands, the sudden straightening of security personnel as she passed. Officer Reynolds was stationed outside the courtroom doors. When he saw Kira approaching, his posture went rigid. "Deputy Director," he acknowledged, his voice formal. "Officer Reynolds." Kira stopped in front of him. "I'd like to speak with you and Officer Taylor after court adjourns today." "Yes, ma'am. I've already informed him." "Good." Kira reached for the door handle. "Ma'am," Reynolds said quickly. "About this morning. We'll discuss it later, officer." Her tone made it clear the conversation was over for now. Reynolds nodded and opened the door for her. Inside, the courtroom was more crowded than it had been that morning. Kira took a seat in the back row again, but this time she felt the weight of eyes on her. The young bailiff by the judge's bench kept glancing in her direction. The court reporter looked up from her machine twice to steal a peek. Kira took out her notebook and resumed her observations, though she knew the data would be skewed now. Everyone was on their best behavior, hyper-aware of her presence. Still, there were things to learn even from watching people try too hard. The afternoon dragged on through 3 minor cases. Kira noted how security responded to various situations. A raised voice from a frustrated defendant, a cell phone that rang despite the clear instructions to silence all devices, a witness who tried to approach the bench without permission. In each instance, the response was textbook perfect. Too perfect. They were putting on a show. By 4:30, court was adjourned. The crowd filtered out slowly, many casting curious glances toward Kira as they passed. She remained seated, waiting, until the room had mostly emptied before approaching the bailiff. "I'll need to use the conference room," she told him, "and please ask Officers Reynolds and Taylor to join me there in 10 minutes. The bailiff nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am, right away." The small conference room off the main hallway was blandly institutional. Beige walls, a rectangular table surrounded by 8 chairs, a whiteboard marked with faded blue ink that hadn't been completely erased. Kira settled at the head of the table and spread out her notes. 8 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. "Come in," she called. Reynolds and Taylor entered, both looking uncomfortably formal. They stood at attention just inside the doorway as if awaiting inspection. "Sit down, please." Kira gestured to the chairs across from her. They sat in unison, backs straight, hands folded on the table. "I want to be clear about something," Kira began. "This meeting isn't about punishing you for what happened this morning. This is about understanding why it happened." The officers exchanged a glance. "With all due respect, ma'am," Reynolds spoke first, "we were following protocol for suspicious activity." "Tell me about this protocol," Kira said. "What specifically made my behavior suspicious?" Reynolds shifted in his seat. "You were taking detailed notes on courtroom security positions and procedures." "And how did you know what I was writing?" Reynolds stopped. "We didn't. Not specifically." "So what drew your attention to me in the first place?" The officers were silent for a moment. Taylor stared at his hands. Reynolds cleared his throat. "You just stood out," he finally said. "Stood out," Kira repeated. "In what way?" "You were watching the officers more than the proceedings," Taylor offered. Kira nodded slowly. "That's true. But there were at least 3 law students in that courtroom also taking notes. There was a journalist in the second row. None of them were approached." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken understanding. "I'm not here to make accusations," Kira said finally. "I'm here to identify problems so we can fix them. And what happened this morning, that's a problem." "Yes, ma'am," both officers murmured. "Here's what's going to happen," Kira continued. "I'll be here for the rest of the week conducting my assessment. During that time, I expect the 2 of you to continue your duties as normal. Don't put on a show. Don't try to impress me. Just do your jobs as you would any other day." She looked each officer in the eye. "At the end of the week, we'll meet again. We'll discuss my findings and you'll have the opportunity to provide input on how security can be improved in this courthouse. Is that clear?" "Yes, ma'am," they replied, in unison. "One more thing," Kira added as they stood to leave. "This incident will be included in my report, not to get you in trouble, but because it highlights larger issues that need to be addressed. Understood?" They nodded, Reynolds looking resigned, Taylor still visibly uncomfortable. After they left, Kira sat alone in the conference room for several minutes, thinking. The confrontation that morning had been unpleasant, but maybe it had been necessary. Sometimes problems had to be exposed before they could be fixed. Her phone buzzed with a text message from the district chief judge, asking how her first day of assessment had gone. Kira smiled slightly as she typed her reply. Revealing. As she gathered her notes and prepared to leave, there was another knock at the door. Judge Chen entered without waiting for a response. "Just checking to see if you've survived your first day," the judge said, leaning against the doorframe. "I think I'll recover," Kira replied with a small smile. "Good." Chen nodded. "Because from what I hear, you're exactly what this place needs." Compliment was unexpected. "What makes you say that?" "Because you didn't come in here throwing your weight around or trying to prove something," Chen said. "You came to learn, to observe, to understand the problems before trying to solve them. That's rare in leadership these days." Kira appreciated the vote of confidence, but she knew the hard part was still ahead. Identifying problems was one thing. Solving them, especially when they were rooted in attitudes and assumptions rather than just procedures, was something else entirely. "Tomorrow's another day," Kira said, standing and gathering her things. "It is," Chen agreed. "And if you need anything, a different perspective, access to areas that might be restricted, someone to cut through bureaucratic nonsense, my door is open." "Thank you," Kira said, meaning it. Having an ally, especially one with a judge's authority, could make her job significantly easier. As she drove home that evening, watching the courthouse shrink in her rearview mirror, Kira thought about the day's events. It hadn't gone as planned, but maybe it had gone as needed. Sometimes the most important problems were the ones you weren't looking for. Her phone rang through her car speakers. It was her boss, the director of security for the entire district. "I hear you had an eventful first day," he said when she answered. Kira sighed. The courthouse grapevine had obviously reached all the way to headquarters. "You could say that," she replied. "But don't worry, I'm just getting started." By Wednesday morning, word had spread throughout the courthouse about the new deputy director and what had happened on her first day. Kira could feel the difference as soon as she walked through the metal detectors. The security officer at the entrance, a middle-aged woman with tight blonde curls, checked her ID with exaggerated care. "Good morning, Deputy Director Wilson," she said, her voice just a touch too loud as if making sure everyone nearby heard the title. "Good morning, officer." Kira glanced at the name badge. "Officer Harper. If there's anything you need during your visit, just let me know." "I appreciate that." Kira took back her ID and clipped it to her blazer. Today she'd opted for charcoal gray slacks and a burgundy blouse under the same navy blazer she'd worn yesterday. Professional but comfortable, it was going to be a long day. She'd barely made it 10 steps into the main hallway when she spotted the courthouse administrator hurrying toward her. Thomas Patel was a short, round man with thinning hair and perpetually worried eyes. Today those eyes looked particularly anxious. "Deputy Director Wilson," he called, slightly out of breath as he caught up to her. "I've been hoping to catch you. I'm Thomas Patel, the administrator for this facility." "Mr. Patel," Kira shook his offered hand. "I was planning to meet with you later today." Yes, it's on my calendar," he assured her. "But I thought perhaps we could speak privately first, just to make sure we're on the same page about yesterday's unfortunate incident." And there it was, the damage control. Kira had been expecting this. "I have a few minutes now," she said. "Your office?" Patel nodded gratefully and led her through a series of hallways to a modest office in the administrative wing. Unlike the public areas of the courthouse, with their imposing marble and dark wood, this section was all practicality. Beige carpet, off-white walls, and furniture that had seen better days. Patel's office reflected the man himself, neat but unremarkable, with stacks of papers organized into careful piles and family photos arranged in identical frames. "Please have a seat," he gestured to a chair across from his desk, closing the door behind them. "Coffee?" "No, thank you." Patel settled into his chair, adjusted his tie, and folded his hands on the desk. "First, I want to personally apologize for what happened yesterday. Officers Reynolds and Taylor have been spoken to about their behavior." "That's not necessary," Kira said. "As I told them, I'm not here to get anyone in trouble. I'm here to identify issues so we can address them." Of course, Patel nodded rapidly. "And we appreciate your discretion in this matter. The last thing we need is for headquarters to think we have some kind of systemic problem here." Kira studied him for a moment. "Mr. Patel, do you believe there is a systemic problem here?" The administrator blinked, caught off guard by the direct question. "Well, that is, we occasionally have incidents, as any courthouse does, but nothing that would suggest—" "In the past 6 months," Kira interrupted gently, "this courthouse has reported 14 security incidents. That's more than double the rate of any other facility in the district." Patel's mouth opened, then closed. He adjusted his tie again. "Those numbers can be misleading. We're very thorough in our reporting. Other courthouses might not document every minor issue." "Perhaps," Kira conceded. but 3 of those incidents involved unauthorized access to restricted areas. 1 involved a weapon. That's not minor, Mr. Patel. The administrator's shoulders slumped slightly. No, it's not, he admitted, but we've implemented new procedures since then. Additional training, more frequent patrols. And yet yesterday, 2 officers removed me from a courtroom without ever asking to see my identification until after the fact, Kira pointed out. That suggests the new procedures aren't addressing the underlying issues. Patel looked genuinely distressed now. What exactly are you suggesting, Deputy Director? Kira leaned forward. I'm not suggesting anything yet. I'm still gathering information. But I will tell you this. By the end of my assessment, I intend to have a clear understanding of what's working in this courthouse and what isn't. And then we'll make changes accordingly. The administrator nodded slowly. I see. Well, you'll have our full cooperation, of course. I'm glad to hear it. Kira stood. I'll see you at our scheduled meeting this afternoon. As she left Patel's office, Kira could practically feel the man's anxiety following her down the hallway. She'd been perhaps a bit more direct than necessary, but sometimes that was what it took to cut through the layers of bureaucratic self-protection. Her next stop was the security office on the ground floor, a windowless room filled with monitors showing feeds from cameras throughout the building. 3 officers staffed the desk, watching the screens with varying degrees of attention. The oldest of the 3, a heavy-set man with a salt-and-pepper beard, stood up as she entered. Deputy Director Wilson, he said, offering his hand. I'm Lieutenant Vasquez, head of day shift security. Lieutenant, Kira shook his hand. I'd like to observe your operation for a while, if that's all right. Of course. Vasquez pulled up a chair for her. We've been expecting you. For the next 2 hours, Kira sat quietly in the security office watching the interactions between officers, listening to radio communications, and observing how they monitored the various areas of the courthouse. She took notes occasionally, but mostly just absorbed the rhythm of the operation. What she saw wasn't reassuring. The officers were professional enough, but there was a casualness to their approach that concerned her. Blind spots in the camera coverage were treated as amusing, quirks rather than serious vulnerabilities. Radio chatter sometimes veered into personal conversations. And most troubling was the obvious hierarchy among the officers. Who got the easy assignments, who got stuck monitoring the parking garage, who was consulted when decisions needed to be made. At one point, an alert came in about an unattended bag in the main lobby. Kira watched as Vasquez dispatched 2 officers to investigate. Rodriguez and Chu, he said into his radio. We've got a suspicious package near the north entrance. Check it out. Kira made a note of the response time. 3 minutes and 42 seconds from alert to resolution. Not terrible, but not great either. The bag had turned out to belong to an elderly man who had set it down while tying his shoe, and then wandered a few steps away. False alarm, one of the other officers said with a chuckle as the alert was cleared. They usually are, Vasquez agreed, but you never know. By lunchtime, Kira had seen enough of the Security Operations Center. She thanked Vasquez for his cooperation and headed to the cafeteria, where she found Judge Chen already seated at a corner table. Join me? The judge offered when she spotted Kira. Thanks. Kira set her tray down and took a seat. Today's offering was slightly less wilted salad and something claiming to be chicken soup. How's your morning been? Less interesting than yours, I suspect, Chen replied. Though I did have a defendant try to flee my courtroom. Made it about 10 feet before the bailiff caught him. I heard the call, Kira said. Response time was good. Chen nodded. Bailey's one of the good ones. Been here 20 years, knows the job inside and out. She stirred her soup thoughtfully. So, what's your assessment so far? This place a complete disaster? Kira smiled slightly. I don't do snap judgments, Judge Chen. Pat, please, and that's not a denial. There are issues, Kira admitted. Some procedural, some more fundamental. Like officers who profile visitors based on appearance. Chen, Pat asked bluntly. Kira met her gaze. Among other things. I've been trying to address it for years, Pat said, her voice lower now. Write-ups, training sessions, stern talks. Nothing seems to stick. Some of these officers have been here for decades. They've developed certain habits. Habits can be broken, Kira said. Or the people with those habits can be reassigned. Pat's eyebrows rose slightly. You have that kind of authority? As deputy director? Yes. Though it's not my preferred approach. Kira took a bite of her salad. People can change if given the right motivation and tools. Some people, Pat corrected. Others are set in their ways. Before Kira could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from the director of security, her boss. Call me when you have a moment. Patel contacted me about your visit. Kira sighed. The administrator hadn't wasted any time. The officers turned, surprised by her intervention. The young lawyer looked at her with a mixture of frustration and relief at finding a new audience for his complaints. These officers made me empty everything in my bag and take off my shoes, while they let that guy walk through with just a quick scan, he said, pointing to another man in a suit who was already headed for the elevators. The only difference between us is the color of our skin. Kira turned to the senior officer present, a balding man whose nameplate read Griffith. Is this true, officer? Griffith's face tightened. We conduct random additional screenings for security purposes. This gentleman was selected randomly. That's bull, the lawyer began, but Kira held up a hand to stop him. What's your name, sir? She asked. Anthony Washington. I'm an assistant public defender. I come through this checkpoint 5 days a week and I get randomly selected about half the time. Kira turned back to Griffith. Do you keep records of these random screenings, officer? Documentation of who gets selected and how often? The question clearly caught him off guard. Well, no, not as such. We use our judgment based on security protocols. I see. Kira nodded thoughtfully. Mr. Washington, I apologize for the inconvenience. I'm Kira Wilson, Deputy Director of Security for the district. I'd appreciate it if you'd contact my office later to discuss your experiences here in more detail. Washington seemed surprised by her response. You're the Deputy Director? I am, Kira confirmed, and I'm currently conducting a review of security procedures in this courthouse. The lawyer glanced at the now uncomfortable officers. In that case, I'd be happy to share my observations. Thank you. Kira handed him her card. Now, I believe you have a client waiting. As Washington hurried toward the elevators, Kira turned to Officer Griffith. I'd like to see the written protocols for additional screening selections by the end of the day. Yes, ma'am. Griffith nodded stiffly. The incident had drawn attention she hadn't wanted, but it had also provided valuable information. As she walked away, she noticed Pat Chen watching from near the information desk, a small smile on her face. Quite a scene, the judge commented as Kira approached. Not how I planned to spend my morning, Kira admitted. Sometimes the most revealing moments are the unplanned ones. Pat fell into step beside her as they walked toward the elevators. Washington's a good lawyer, by the way. Sharp, dedicated. He's in my courtroom at least once a week. And does he always get randomly selected for extra screening? Pat's expression turned wry. What do you think? The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and observations. By late afternoon, Kira had spoken with judges, lawyers, administrative staff, and more security officers. Some were candid about the problems they saw. Others were defensive or evasive. But a clear picture was emerging, one of a security system built on outdated equipment, inconsistent procedures, and unaddressed biases. At 5 o'clock, she met with Thomas Patel again to discuss her preliminary findings. The administrator looked even more anxious than he had the previous day, fidgeting with a pen as she laid out her observations. These are serious concerns, Deputy Director, he said when she finished. But I must point out that budget constraints are real, but not insurmountable, Kira interrupted gently. Some of these issues don't require additional funding. They require changes in training and accountability. Patel set down his pen. The officers won't like it. The union might push back. Possibly, Kira acknowledged. But my concern isn't making officers comfortable. It's ensuring this courthouse is safe and accessible for everyone who uses it. And if we resist these changes? Patel asked, his voice carefully neutral. Kira met his gaze. Then I'll have no choice but to recommend that headquarters take a more direct role in managing security here, which would effectively mean replacing much of the current leadership. She let that sink in for a moment. I'd prefer a collaborative approach, Mr. Patel. But make no mistake, these changes will happen one way or another. The administrator was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. I understand. You'll have my support. It was a small victory, but Kira knew the real challenges were still ahead. As she left Patel's office, her phone buzzed with a text from Officer Taylor. Can we meet somewhere private? Have more info about Vasquez. Kira replied quickly, suggesting the small coffee shop across from the courthouse. Whatever Taylor had to share, it might be the key to understanding just how deep the problems went and how difficult they would be to fix. What had started as a routine security assessment had become something much more significant. She was no longer just evaluating procedures and equipment. She was challenging an entrenched culture, and that, she knew from experience, was where the real resistance would begin. The coffee shop across from the courthouse was busy with the afterwork crowd when Kira arrived. Rain still fell steadily outside, drumming against the windows and creating a cozy atmosphere inside despite the packed tables. She spotted Officer Taylor in the back corner, out of uniform in jeans and a gray sweater, nervously turning a paper cup between his hands. Kira ordered a black coffee and made her way to his table. Taylor stood when he saw her approach, an old-fashioned courtesy that seemed at odds with his youthful appearance. Deputy Director, he greeted her. Thanks for meeting me. Kira is fine when we're off duty, she said, taking a seat across from him. What's this about, Taylor? He glanced around, making sure no one was within earshot. It's about Lieutenant Vasquez and some of the other senior officers. There's stuff going on that didn't make it into any official reports. Kira sipped her coffee, giving him space to continue. The knife incident with Judge Chen wasn't isolated, Taylor said, lowering his voice. There have been at least 3 other security breaches in the last year that were covered up or downplayed. Such as? Kira prompted. A bailiff found a bag of pills in the men's bathroom near courtroom 2A. It disappeared from the evidence locker the next day. A custodian reported seeing someone trying to access the judge's private entrance after hours, but the report vanished. And there was a domestic incident in the parking garage that should have resulted in an arrest, but the guy was released without charges because he was friends with one of our sergeants. Kira frowned. How do you know all this? Taylor looked down at his coffee. I've only been on the job 3 years. I notice things. People don't always watch what they say around the new guy. He hesitated. Also, I've been keeping my own notes. After that first incident with the knife, something felt off about how it was handled. Why are you telling me this now? Kira asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Because of what happened with you, Taylor said simply. How you were treated. It made me realize I can't just keep my head down anymore. And because you seem like someone who might actually do something about it. Kira studied the young officer. His expression was earnest, his posture tense with the nervous energy of someone taking a significant risk. Do you have documentation of any of this? She asked. Taylor nodded. Some. Dates, times, names when I have them. It's not official, but it's a start. Kira finished for him. I'll need to see everything you have. I figured. Taylor pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. It's all in here. I've been writing things down since my 2nd month on the job. Kira took the notebook, noticing how worn the cover was. You're taking a big risk, Taylor. He shrugged, trying to appear casual, though his expression remained serious. Maybe, but it feels like a bigger risk not to say anything. Next time, it might not just be an embarrassing mistake with a deputy director. Someone could get hurt. As they finished their coffee, Taylor shared more details about the workplace culture at the courthouse, the cliques among officers, the unwritten rules about who got which assignments. The casual comments that revealed troubling attitudes toward certain types of visitors. It's not everyone, he emphasized. Most of the officers are good people trying to do their jobs well. But the ones who aren't, they set the tone. By the time they left the coffee shop, the rain had stopped, and the early evening sky had cleared to reveal patches of blue between the clouds. Kira thanked Taylor for his information and watched him walk toward the parking garage, his shoulders straighter than they had been, as if unburdened by sharing what he knew. Back in her hotel room, Kira spent hours reviewing Taylor's notebook, alongside her own notes from the past few days. Patterns emerged, connections formed. What had started as a routine security assessment had become something much more significant, an investigation into a culture of negligence, favoritism, and bias that compromised the safety of everyone who entered the courthouse. She called her boss, Director Howard, just after 9 o'clock. "I'll need to extend my stay," she told him when he answered. "The situation here is more complex than we realized." Howard sighed audibly. "What have you found?" "Evidence of systematic security failures that have been deliberately concealed," Kira said, keeping her tone professional despite her anger at what she'd discovered. "Incidents that were minimized or unreported, favoritism in assignments and promotions, and a pattern of discriminatory treatment toward certain courthouse visitors." "That's a serious accusation, Wilson." "It's not an accusation. It's a finding based on evidence," Kira replied. "I have documentation, witness statements, and my own observations." There was a long pause before Howard spoke again. "What are you proposing?" "A complete overhaul of security. Leadership and procedures at this courthouse," Kira said without hesitation. "New training protocols, new reporting structures, new accountability measures, and likely personnel changes at the senior level." "Patel will fight you on this," Howard warned. "So will the union." "Probably," Kira agreed. "But if they do, they'll be fighting against the safety of judges, staff, and the public. That's not a position anyone wants to defend publicly." Another pause longer this time, then, "Draft your proposal. I'll review it when you get back. But Wilson?" "Yes, sir. Make sure every recommendation is bulletproof. If we're going to do this, we can't leave any room for pushback." "Understood," Kira said. "Thank you for your support." "Don't thank me yet," Howard replied. "This won't be easy." Kira spent much of the night working on her report, organizing her findings and drafting recommendations. By morning, she had a clear plan of action, one that would fundamentally change how security operated at the courthouse. Friday dawned clear and cool, the sky washed clean by the previous day's rain. Kira arrived at the courthouse early, determined to make her final day of assessment count. She had meetings scheduled with Judge Chen, the head of the public defender's office, and finally, a closing session with Patel and the security leadership team. The morning passed quickly, with both Chen and the chief public defender providing additional insights that confirmed Kira's findings. By lunchtime, her report was nearly complete, needing only the information from her final meetings to fill in the remaining gaps. As she crossed the main lobby toward the cafeteria, Kira noticed a commotion at the security checkpoint. A tall man, in an expensive suit, was arguing loudly with Officer Reynolds, his voice carrying across the marble floor. "This is the third time this month. I'm a practicing attorney in this courthouse. Sir, random screenings are part of our security protocol," Reynolds was saying, his tone clipped. "If you want to enter, you'll need to comply." Kira recognized the attorney. He had been pointed out to her the previous day as one of the most successful defense lawyers in the county. He was also, she noted, the only person in the current line being subjected to additional screening. She changed direction, heading toward the checkpoint. As she approached, Reynolds saw her coming and straightened, his expression shifting from confrontational to carefully neutral. "Is there a problem here, Officer Reynolds?" Kira asked. "Just a routine security check, Deputy Director," Reynolds replied. "Mr. Benson here was selected for additional screening." The attorney turned toward her, frustration evident in his face. "There's nothing routine about it when it happens every time I come to court. I've practiced law in this building for 15 years, and this kind of treatment only started when Officer Reynolds was assigned to this checkpoint." Kira looked at Reynolds. "Is that true, officer?" Does Mr. Benson regularly receive additional screening? Reynolds's jaw tightened. As I said, the selections are random. In that case, Kira said calmly, I'm sure you won't mind showing me the log of these random selections. I'd be interested to see the distribution pattern. We don't maintain such logs, Reynolds said, repeating what Kira had heard from Officer Griffith the day before. Perhaps we should start, Kira suggested. In fact, I'll be recommending that in my report. She turned to the attorney. Mr. Benson, I apologize for the inconvenience. Please proceed. Reynolds began to object, but Kira cut him off with a look. We'll discuss this further in the closing meeting this afternoon, officer. As Benson collected his belongings and moved through the checkpoint, he gave Kira a nod of appreciation. Thank you, Deputy Director. Just doing my job, she replied. The afternoon meeting was scheduled for 3 o'clock in the main conference room. Kira arrived early to set up, arranging copies of her preliminary findings for each attendee. Thomas Patel was the first to arrive, looking nervous as he took his seat at the table. I've heard rumors about your recommendations, he said without preamble. People are concerned. Good, Kira replied. They should be. The current security situation in this courthouse is unacceptable. Patel leaned forward. Deputy Director Wilson, I understand your concerns, but I urge you to consider a more gradual approach. Change takes time. Mr. Patel, when it comes to safety, sometimes time is a luxury we can't afford, Kira said. Would you rather explain to the county board why we need to improve security now, or explain to them later why someone got hurt because we moved too slowly? Before Patel could respond, other attendees began filing in. Lieutenant Vasquez, Officer Reynolds, several judges including Pat Chen, and to Kira's surprise, Officer Taylor, who took a seat near the back of the room. Once everyone was seated, Kira stood at the head of the table and began her presentation. She outlined the issues she'd identified: outdated equipment, inconsistent procedures, inadequate training, and concerning patterns in how security was applied to different courthouse visitors. Based on these findings, she concluded, I'll be recommending a comprehensive overhaul of security operations at this facility. This will include leadership changes, new training requirements, updated equipment, and mandatory reporting procedures to ensure accountability. The room was silent for a moment. Then Lieutenant Vasquez spoke up, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. With all due respect, Deputy Director, you've been here for less than a week. You don't understand the complexities of what we deal with every day. On the contrary, Lieutenant, Kira replied evenly. I understand perfectly. I understand that security in this courthouse has been compromised repeatedly under the current leadership. I understand that certain visitors are subjected to different standards based on arbitrary and potentially biased criteria. And I understand that these issues have been known and ignored for far too long. From the back of the room, Officer Taylor spoke up. She's right. We all know there are problems, we just don't talk about them. All eyes turned to him, some surprised, others angry. Reynolds glared openly. Officer Taylor has provided valuable insights during my assessment, Kira said, drawing attention back to herself. As have many of you. The goal here isn't to assign blame, but to create a safer environment for everyone who enters this building. Judge Chen nodded approvingly. Well said, Deputy Director. And long overdue. The discussion continued for another hour, sometimes heated, occasionally productive. By the end, it was clear that while there would be resistance to some changes, others were widely supported even by those initially skeptical. As the meeting broke up, Pat Chen approached Kira. You've stirred up quite a hornet's nest, she observed. Sometimes that's necessary, Kira replied. The real work starts now. Will you be back to oversee the implementation? Kira nodded. Absolutely. This isn't a report that's going to sit on a shelf gathering dust. I'm personally invested in making sure these changes happen. Pat smiled. Good, because what you're doing here matters, not just for security, but for justice. She gestured around the emptying conference room. This building is supposed to represent equal justice under law. It's about time our security practices reflected that ideal. As Kira gathered her materials, she reflected on the week's events. What had begun with her embarrassing removal from a courtroom had evolved into an opportunity for meaningful change. There would be challenges ahead, resistance to overcome, old habits to break. But for the first time in years, there was momentum for reform. And sometimes that was all you needed to start making a difference.